Kalima! 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 Shakti De!
Perfect world was a dream which primitive cerebrals like
He's a traitor! He's a sadist!
You're all going to die down here.
The greatest trick the devil ever pulled was convincing the world he didn't exist.
Heresy shouldn't be this much fun, but it just is. It just is. So of course, let me greet you and say, Happy Heresies, and welcome to the desert of the real. Bonvidos and bienvenidos a AM by Gnostic Radio. Broadcast at the virtual Alexandria and always through the God above God.cam. We don't really offer red pills, but red suppositories, because the entire cosmos is reeling from the constipation of ignorance. We don't take prisoners, but liberate them. And we are not the final authority on anything, but hope to be an endless possibility for everything. You are the final authority, and have always been. So beautiful before they made you forget. Here you find the mystery that works for you and only you. Unleash your inner Prometheus and sorcerer Simon Magus so you won't get fooled again. After all, it was Tom Robbins in Even Cowgirls Get the Blues who wrote, "Disbelief in magic can force a poor soul into believing in government and business."
people should not be afraid of their governments. Governments should be afraid of their people.
Time to believe in your internal magic, as well as creativity and ability to inspire others. I'm so spiritually hard you're here with me on this March, the year of our Demiurge 2018. I am Abraxas, and his meat sack incarnation of Miguel Connor, podcasting from the lawful but frigid dystopia of Chicago, patiently waiting for the beginning of the world. I am your Pompatus of Gnosis, but so are you, as together we're raging against heaven and storming the gates of hell for our misplaced childhoods and paradises lost.
Yes, these are bruises from fighting. Yes, I'm comfortable with that. I am enlightened.
We know how serious things are as the Archons smother humanity's imagination and reason in the 21st century with pillows of disinformation and self-importance. But now it's Deadpool serious at the end of the Kali Yuga, as we'll be discussing on this episode. I mean, in the Dhammapada, Buddha did write, "How can there be laughter? How can there be pleasure when the whole world is burning?" Don McLean in American Pie sang "Fire is the devil's only friend," and, of all people, it was Martin Luther who said, "We are all under the same roof, but the house is on fire."
We are things that labor under the illusion of having a self, this accretion of sensory experience and feeling, programmed with total assurance that we are each somebody, when in fact everybody's nobody.
What a flaming shit show are these burning times of neo-Puritanism and pseudo-algorithm censorship, oh you spiritual entrepreneurs and doubting Thomases, putting your fingers through the wounds of so many digital false messiahs. These may not be the end times, but it certainly looks like the end of human consciousness. How do we navigate this? We go to the beginning and we go to the end, as the ancient Gnostics were wont to do. We go on a hero's quest, and our astral guests certainly did that and brought back so many pearls of great price. That is Aki Cederberg, who materializes at the virtual Alexandria to discuss his latest book, Journeys in the Kali Yuga, a pilgrimage from esoteric India to pagan Europe.
Wow, it's very nice.
Aki's spiritual biography is well written and really moved me. It's an odyssey into finding occult secrets in India, from hidden sexual rites to Dionysian religious festivals. From entering the black womb of the goddess Kali to experiencing the Abraxas-like countenance of Shiva himself. Aki's adventure into so many dark nights of the Atman brought him back to Europe, where he uncovered how Indian mysticism related to his pagan roots, taking him face to face with forgotten Scandinavian gods and the coming of Ragnarok, which has a similar vibe as the Kali Yuga.
Real wrath of God type stuff. Exactly. Fire and brimstone coming down from the skies. Rivers and seas boiling.
40 years of darkness, earthquakes, volcanoes.
The dead rising from the grave. Human sacrifice, dogs and cats living together. Mass hysteria.
In the end, Aki found that the Gnostic attitude on the cosmos is close to right, as he mined the inner nature of all deities. Yes, we get Jungian and Campbellian as we see how the world is burning and burning and burning. A remarkable interview from a unique voice in the Esoterica. For more information on Aki Cederberg, please visit, you got it, akicederberg.com, or just check out our show notes.
Am I wrong?
No, you're not wrong.
Am I wrong?
You're not wrong, so you're just an asshole.
Okay then.
Before the first part of our interview, for non-members, I'd like to read a passage from Journeys in the Kali Yuga that blew me away and exemplifies Aki's breathtaking Gnosis. It certainly relates to what I've been babbling about. Here it is. Back in my ancestral house in the forest, I am surrounded by an all-devouring twilight. Only in the hearth is there a fire burning. Now, as it gets ever darker and the world slips into ever gloomier night, I turn to the blaze inside, to the embers of a flame waiting to be reborn. For there is a fire that never goes out. I do not know whether the gods are faces that we give to that which is faceless in order to comprehend it and be close to it as human beings. If they are manifestations of distinct powers arising from an unknowable immensity or supreme reality or a oneness. If they are mediators or messengers between us and the God who is beyond comprehension. If they are aspects of nature and the world personified. If they are archetypes or forces of consciousness both within and without man, or if they are at the highest human expression of being beyond mortality. Perhaps they are a combination of all of the above. What I do know is that the gods are mysteries, and that we as human beings are ultimately drawn to them. And I know that they respond if one calls out to them. In times when the shrouds between worlds are temporarily unveiled, when our universe expands, they make themselves manifest. For this to happen, one has to live poetically and live strongly. One has to live a life of great deeds, of overcoming, a life worthy of divine attention. One has to boldly face great sorrow and greater joy, for the gods have no interest in dull normalcy. Infinite divinities await, hidden within man himself, which is always the place of the final pilgrimage. The godlight becomes living reality when dreams intersect with the waking world. These are knife-edge moments when the mythic cuts through the temporal to reveal the timeless, where the spirit is elevated to its superior states, where the poetic takes flight over the rational. In moments such as these, the gods awaken and reclaim their seat in the soul. We can hear them when we call out for them, in the crash of thunder and in the whisper of rustling leaves, in the creak of frosted towering evergreens and in the roar of waves. in the solemn song of eternal dawn, and in the ecstatic cries of battle and love. And we wait for the furor of their return. Burn, baby, burn. The gods are coming.
Free your mind.
What is he doing?
He's beginning to believe.
Oh, and the music you'll hear at the end of the show is provided by the talented Donovan Sims. If you're interested in more of his tunes or would like to leverage his music production, just contact me at my homepage. He's helped me out, so I'm helping him out. But now, let us do the interview with Aki, and let us keep writing our own gospel and living our own myth, like he did, before the fiery roof finally collapses upon us, like the cyclical curse found in the movie Mother.
I am become death, the destroyer of worlds.
The quest is to be liberated from the negative, which is really our own will to nothingness. And once having said yes to the instant, the affirmation is contagious. It bursts into a chain of affirmations that knows no limit. To say yes to one instant is to say yes to all of existence.
This is the AM Byte interview, and with us we definitely have the pleasure of being joined by Aki Cederberg to discuss his new book, Journeys in the Kali Yuga, a pilgrimage from esoteric India to pagan Europe. How are you doing today, Aki?
I'm very good, and very nice to talk with you.
Very nice to meet you, and thank you so much for your time and coming on the show. As mentioned, I really enjoyed the book. It was your book moved me. It was an experience, and there was so much to it. It was a wonderful, you might say, spiritual autobiography, as they say. So we certainly are glad to share it with the audience. But first, tell us a bit about yourself, Aki, specifically your background and how you became involved in Hinduism.
I am a musician, writer, traveler, filmmaker, from Finland, Helsinki, Finland, originally, and so all of these things that I'm involved with, kind of how I became interested in Hinduism was that when I was younger, I lived in England as a part of this kind of pagan or heathen community or brotherhood, and I was trying to sort of live as much as possible according to some sort of pagan or pre-Christian type of spiritual tradition in Europe. And I noticed the difficulties of that being that we don't really have a living lineage of teachers. We don't have a living tradition in the same way that Hinduism is a living tradition. So one could view Hinduism, or the so-called Hinduism, Sanatan Dharma, really as the world's oldest surviving pagan tradition, in the sense that it is truly not a Christian and a pre-Christian tradition, and in many ways it has a lot of similarities with the European pagan pantheons, but our tradition has been broken, whereas theirs has not. So they still have living teachers and masters and singers of the secrets, so to speak, whereas, our traditions have been severed. And so I became interested in India because I was interested to see a living tradition, how a living tradition would work, as opposed to a broken one.
And before this, did you have to become initiated before going to India, or get your hands dirty, or was this something you just simply went with sort of an agnostic attitude?
No, I totally just went to India, and I think, it has been said that when the pupil is, or when the student is ready, a teacher will appear. And so, of course, I had many adventures in India, um, that were very confused in their own way. I mean, because India is a very bewildering place with a multitude of gods and goddesses, and you really have a hard time as a Westerner of trying to make sense of it all and trying to have any kind of handle on this kind of new type of reality. So it was only after much extensive traveling that I then came upon my anchor, so to speak, or my foot in the door, where I did receive initiation and did meet somebody who granted me access into a more traditional, structured form of the Hindu esoteric systems. Because you as a Westerner, you really are very lost when you just enter India and sort of start searching for the truth in quotation mark. It's like, good luck with that.
Oh, I'm sure. It's it must have been quite a culture shock. And how long were you in India your first time? And we'll discuss later your two trips. But the first time, how long were you there, Aki?
Well, my first trip was 3 months.
Wow, and it seemed a lot happened in those 3 months. And you talk about the idea of a pilgrimage, and you yourself were in a pilgrimage. Tell us about the concept of the pilgrimage and how it pertained to you.
Well, the pilgrimage is, I think, a sacred journey that mirrors the internal journey that a person takes in search of what is truly valuable and what is real and what is authentic. And I had started to make these kind of journeys in my own homeland and in Europe, and then in India. And I realized at some point I realized that I am on this type of sacred journey. Now, it's not just travel for its own sake or the seeking of exotic experience that you do a pilgrimage. It is to find something, and that's the hardest thing, like to find something and then to bring it back. So the object power in between place. It's in India, this is called a tirtha, and this is like an in between the ordinary and the extraordinary world. They're like meeting places, special places. And so this is the object, where you try to go on your pilgrimage. And then the purpose of pilgrimage is, of course, then to bring back something to your own world, to not stay in that world forever, but then actually bring home the treasure. And I guess the thing is that, you never really go anywhere. You're always stuck with yourself anyway. But these places then make something happen in you if you are open to it, and if you're lucky enough to find genuine places where something else can then be revealed in yourself. So, I mean, this is really the quest for wisdom, for truth, for God or gods, if you will. This is the oldest journey that there is, really. And it's a very human journey and a very universal journey, although it takes place in localized places.
Well said. Yes, of course. Campbell's hero's journey and Jung going down to the cave to meet the dragon and so forth. So I guess we all have to follow that archetypal story if we want to find ourselves. And I'm sure it must have been hard, because your book is it's a wonderful journey. It's very vivid, and some of your descriptions were just amazing. I mean, you are walking in different places in India, and there's terrorist attacks, dead people on the street. Sorry, there are riots, there are hucksters at all times. Were you wondering, at least from the beginning, oh my God, I am going to die here?
Yeah, I mean, I do think it's a perilous path. It's not for everybody, and it has this idea that it is a journey, that you have to kind of go out of the safe world or the bourgeois world, or the world of the commonplace. You have to leave your normal world behind you. You have to, in a way, destroy your world. And because, nothing forced. We can just, us Westerners, we can just sit back with our Netflix and, and like our comfort and our luxury food and all our material comforts that we want. And we can sit there and be safe for eternity. But I don't think that's the purpose of man. And I think we search for meaning, and that search is not necessarily an easy one or even a safe one. And I would add to what we talked about earlier about pilgrimage is that I think a central aspect of it for me was that I had these, ever since I was very young, I had these visions or dreams or just kind of images in my mind or in my spirit. It was like my soul is like marked with these images of places and sensations, and it is like a place of convergence and truth and meaning and joy. And so I undertook these pilgrimages to search for those places that were very vague and sort of untouchable within me, but to try to search for those things in the external outer world. And so India, of course, is ripe with places and things that maybe resemble these things. And so that was the ultimate reason for my pilgrimage, is to find external realities that would mirror those internal realities that I felt and saw inside myself, that were like the beacons that led me on this very sometimes dangerous journey. And India, of course, it's a place where, it is full of disease and destruction and chaos and overpopulation and hucksters at every turn, and yes, even very frequent terrorist attacks and things like this, where I think it's very important that whether you believe in the Hindu world or these spiritual things or not, that if you intend ever to go, not you personally, but anybody thinking of traveling to India or such places, is to really enter that world also on a mythic plane and according to its rules. So when I went to India, the numerous times I went, I always made sure to, make an invocation to Ganesh, the elephant-headed god, first, because he's the destroyer of obstacles and the protector of new beginnings and everything like this. So even if you don't believe in those things, I really advise people to act in accordance as if they were real, because sometimes I just felt that I was being overlooked by some very benevolent forces, because it was sometimes very close that something bad would have happened to me, but it didn't. So,
and when you were there, Aki, did you? Again, it's very vivid. I felt like I was there with you, even in times of danger, like you'd be one place and there'd be a terrorist attack the next day or so forth, or walking over dead bodies in the middle of the street. Were you writing notes, or is this something you had to recollect later on? Because again, you were on the run and it was very intense at times.
No, I've taken into the habit of keeping a travel journal. And even if it's only pieces of, poetry or little reflections or little notes, I use those things later to have enough detail in my mind so that I can recreate what I experienced. Because, when you're writing, you're always recreating reality or creating a new reality in a way. But I try to keep details in mind enough where I can be honest about what I've experienced and not try to fabricate things, too much.
Yeah, indeed. After all, Hermes, the mind, is a trickster god, and our minds will play tricks. So yes, writing this down was probably very useful. As you said, when we write, we create. We're creating a new story, which is our story. And you mentioned the idea of India being a place of destruction, or that part in Asia being a place of destruction. And I love this quote you heard from a young man in Nepal. And the quote is, "Family don't pay so much attention to emotion here because we believe destruction means creation. So we are not scared of dying, more scared of karma." I thought that was very powerful. And how did you feel about that? To me, even if I study about karma, it's still not part of my matrix. I'm still worried about living and dying.
No, it's true. This karma is one of those things where I really still don't have a definite opinion of it, and I'm always interested to hear what people think of it and what it traditionally means. But it is one of those things where I do still have a very vague understanding of it, and I don't want to pretend that I know everything or I'm some sort of esoteric master, because I'm not. And to really expound on very complicated subjects, I think karma is one of those things that it gets simplified to just cause and effect, or you do something bad, you get something bad back. Whereas I think it's a much more intricate and deep esoteric idea, like many of these things in the Indian esoteric world. So I really think, ask if I would have become a sadhu and then lived this sadhu life for 40 years, or if I would have started studying Hindi and studied under a Brahmin for the next 30 years, then, we could maybe talk about karma. but at this point, I think it's a confusing area to me. But I do vividly remember how convinced this young man was it who said it. And I actually have that specific quote because I had a recorder on at that time when he was speaking, and I have that sample even still left of him saying it while these monkeys were jumping on these tourists at these cremation ground ghats, these stairs that lead to the river where they burn bodies. There were these tourists wandering down there, and these monkeys jumped on them. And I was watching that, and then this young man who kind of forced himself upon us as a guide said this thing about death, holistic understanding of death. It's not something so taboo as it is in the West, where we really don't encounter death on many levels. It's always hidden from us, whether it's people, people or friends or family members that die away. We rarely see them, and or if it's animals or whatever, it's always done like behind closed doors. Whereas in India, death is very out in the open, so to speak.
Yes, and it's very interesting. There are other cultural attitudes. For example, you write how as you mentioned, they burn their dead in Nepal. It reminds me, one time I had a co-worker who gave me a ride home, and she was Indian, and we were driving past a cemetery, and she looked at me strangely and said, "What is wrong with you Westerners? Why do you bury your bodies? What happens what happens when you run out of space and the whole earth is just one big cemetery? Why not just burn the body and send it back to nature?" And for me, it was very interesting, the difference between our cultures. And you write how one man told you, burning is learning. It's all ash.
Yeah. It's that happened when we were at the famous Manikarnika burning ghats in Varanasi, or Benares, which is the holy city of India, where people come to die and to cremate their dead. And so it's got these stairs, which are called ghats, that lead to the Ganga river. And so constantly and for thousands of years, there have been bodies burning in the same place, according to tradition. And it is said that it's one of Shiva's favorite dancing grounds. And so people bring their dead there, and then these casteless, sort of dark casteless men have as their job to then cremate these bodies and throw the remains into the river, the ashes into the river. And so this happened as morning was just breaking. It was maybe 6 or 7 o'clock in the morning. the sun was rising. It was very serene at the Ghat at that time. It wasn't loud or anything. There was a warmth in the air of these human barbecues burning everywhere, and bits of ash flying that came into my hair, from the pyres, and then just this dark, castless man trampling on this piece of bone and saying, "Burning is learning, all is ash." And so he was, giving his wisdom as a lifelong corpse burner to me.
Yes, very stoic. I guess here in the West, we kind of have the answer to that, where in the Bible it says ashes to ashes. We all just go back to ashes. It's a great realization of the reality of who we are as organic beings. And there, of course, they take it very seriously. I think you write in one section of your book, I can't remember where you were, but you write, you even walked on a beach, but instead of sand, it was made of human ashes.
Yeah. I just happened to walk on a beach and didn't realize that it was actually also a cremation ground. I was swimming there and stuff, and then I realized a little later, like, whoa, this is a cremation ground, because they're not always so marked, But it is this circle of life there in Varanasi. It's not a gloomy thing, and it's like children bathe every morning in that water, right close to those ghats, and play in the water, and people have their morning bath there and everything. So it is this life and death meeting at this river, which is eternally flowing and considered very sacred in India. Of course, from a Western perspective, it's very polluted and has, very high amounts of cholera, bacteria, and all kinds of other things. But, Indians still consider it the purest of the pure.
And Aki, tell us about your experience at the hopefully I can pronounce it right, the Dakshin Kali temple in Nepal.
Yeah, well, this is one of the places in Nepal where animal sacrifice is still very commonly practiced. And, contrary to the West, in India, again, death and these things are not hidden away. So there's a big line to this temple, and there are these professional butchers in the temple which quite unceremoniously then slaughter the animals which are brought in there. And it's a steady parade of chickens and goats and whatnot that are brought there. And then the animals are beheaded, and then the families that bring those animals there then take them to the butcher or the kind of skinner guy that's close to the temple, who then prepares the animals to be cooked, or like to be able to be cooked. And so all around this sacrificial temple, you see Hindu families having picnics in the forest and preparing their food and eating the sacrificed animal. So it's not wasted, the animal, but its life is dedicated as an offering to Kali, for instance, in this temple. And these kind of temples exist throughout Nepal and India still, where animals are being sacrificed. But it is not as gruesome as one would think, and it is not this, Indiana Jones Temple of Doom kind of stuff. But it's actually pretty beautiful and serene, and one could say that, compared to some sort of normal Western industrialized butcher place, that's much more harmonious and beautiful and somehow healthy than what one can witness at an industrialized butcher place in the West.
Oh, I would agree. I've seen the movies where they slaughter the animals here in the West. At least there they're sacrificing to the gods and they make it holy. Here we're sacrificing to mass production and the dollar.
Yeah. And the animals that they are sacrificing there are still, they've wandered around in the village most of their lives, just, wandering around the village. They're not being kept in tight cages or bred, for sacrifice.
Aki, Aren't all holy places in Nepal and India connected, or at least in Nepal, connected to a natural landmark? And isn't this a reality, this reality you found out that is very relevant to so many cultures, including your own? It was one of your great insights?
Yes. Yeah, I would say that, yes, all temples, or most temples, many temples, at least Shaivite, temples connected with Shiva, and often with other ones as well, are connected to a sacred landmark, like a river, a cave, a mountaintop, a tree, or so forth. But not just in India and Nepal, but also throughout Europe, this has been the custom that temples are erected in a holy place later, after that place is already holy. It is not made holy by walls or a building, but it is discovered and understood to be a place of power, and then a temple arises later. So this is still the tradition also in my country, in Finland, where there are really no temples, pagan temples left, because there were not many pagan temples to begin with, because it wasn't believed that the gods reside in buildings or that are limited into buildings, but that the gods are in the rustling of the leaves and in the crackling of the pine and so forth. That you would find these gods in the wild, in nature, in sacred places in nature, where a particular personality of nature would be strong, and one could somehow connect with it, with offerings and so forth. So the same thing is still in India, that almost always you find that the places where the temples are already, or were already, holy places, often around trees. Often there's an old Bodhi tree, for instance, or one of the special trees that there are, and then the temple is built around this tree, because the sacred men gather these trees to give blessings or to do ceremony or so forth. So this is the way it's always been, and this is a common theme for, I would say, all pagan religions. It's this pagan word is a little difficult because people have very strong associations and mental images to things that might be, not that sincere, and and but I'm describing something that's pre-Christian and often connected to a locality or a people and their culture and so forth, as is Hinduism.
Yeah, something not connected to the angry desert god I think you mentioned in one point, where you're a bit frustrated with things, but we can get to that. And your journey obviously wasn't just one of wonderful enlightenment and all that. There was many peaks and valleys. There was moments of darkness and moments of light. At one point, I like how you wrote that there were 300 million gods in India, but you couldn't find one. What did you mean by that, Aki, and what were you going through at the time?
Yeah, I think it's, when you go to India, you read all these things and you're like, oh, there's 300 million gods in India, and actually just more gods are being born all the time. And then you go there and you can't find any, and you're like, well, where are they? Like, why can I not find them?
Where's mine?
Yeah, it's the frustration when you experience that the holy, or whatever is sacred or holy, meaning somehow possessing an extraordinary or eternal numinous quality, that it still remains at a distance, although you should find it. This is the sacred temple, here we are, okay, and here you're meeting this great holy person or so forth, but you don't feel anything and it doesn't touch you. And so it remains at a distance. It remains with you don't grasp it. So of course that is a reality. You're not gonna find the sacred in the obvious places, and it's not gonna be easy to find. And you really have to look for it and dedicate yourself to the quest of finding it for you to find, one of these 300 million gods,
Yes, and during that section, you quote the Gospel of Thomas, the one that when Jesus says you must make the inner like the outer or the above like the below. So in a way, weren't you saying the important thing is that you find wholeness in that journey? Really, that's how you'll find your God?
Yeah, perhaps. I don't know wholeness, but something like that. Yes, I wanted to find something that would mirror the internal with the external. So yes, to answer your question. Is it also the Gospel of Thomas where Jesus says something along the lines of lift a stone and you will find me, and break a stick and I am there?
Yes, that's it. Yeah, lift a stone and I will be there, and if you split the wood, you will find me there.
Well, that's incredibly beautiful. And yes, so I was reaching for something like that.
And it seems, as you write, or when I was reading the first part of your book, you describe Shiva as the god of eros and artists, of ecstasy, the destruction of all boundaries. And at first I was like, wow, Aki's description really reminds me of Dionysius, not the sort of caricature that we find here in the West of this drunken god of just wine and so forth, but really about the primordial or the earlier powers of Dionysus, really a very enigmatic and powerful god that really, again, destroys all boundaries and pushes us to go beyond ourselves. And later in your book, you actually make the connection of Dionysus and Shiva. Tell us about this process and how these two deities are similar.
Yeah, there's actually a whole book dedicated to this subject matter, written by a French Indologist from the early 20th century, Alain Danielou, who wrote a book called Shiva and Dionysus. And he posits this theory that there was this kind of ur religion at the core of later religious developments, which had at its center in the West Dionysus or Bacchus or a similar figure, and in the East Shiva. So Shiva is maybe, among the oldest gods of India, and Shiva is only like a title. It means Lord. And I guess one of the earliest names of Shiva is Rudra, which means the howler. So Shiva is a very old god, and his earliest representations derive from the Mohenjo-Daro civilization, which is, I don't remember now how many thousands years old, but very old, where he's seen as being this cross-legged, horned, sitting deity. And yes, I mean, Shiva is really very hard to describe, because Shiva has within himself all these very contrary qualities, and he's in a way a very paradoxical being. And it is considered that Shiva is consciousness. Now, but it is hard to approach things just as consciousness like this. So I would put it in this way, that Shiva is, of course, the Lord of ecstatic states. And so it's considered that when humans reach an ecstatic state, whether it's through religious devotion or spiritual practices or even fear or horror or something like this, these ecstatic states are the realms of Shiva and of true spiritual communion. And so this is why Dionysus is considered, if not the same, then a very similar figure in the West, whereas he's a lord of the underworld, he's a lord of the dead, he's connected with the ancestors and the wild, untamed nature. And wine is his sacred drink, just as, Shiva is the lord of all intoxicating substances, because they elevate consciousness into its ecstatic states. And the idea is that this primal religion had at its root this ecstatic experience, that it was not a dogmatic religion as later monotheistic religions were, or a scriptural religion, but it was ecstatic. Ecstasy was at the center of this ancient cult, so to speak. So it's something like that, and I always felt drawn to this figure of Shiva. As a very young man, I for some reason bought a statue of Shiva that I found in a little store here in Helsinki, and it was the famous image of Nataraj, the dancing Shiva, who dances in this circle of fire. And I didn't even know much about Shiva then, but something resonated with me with this sort of ever-expansive deity. And later, the first time I had acid, it was a Shiva blotter. And little things like this that I had, that connected me with Shiva way before I had any, knowledge of India or knowledge of Shiva as such. But it was just, for me, it was just like, there was something that called me. Shiva called to me or something like that. And I always found myself returning to him, like as I would despair in India, where I couldn't find any god among these 300 million gods, as I described in the book, then I would sometimes see an image of a giant statue of Shiva, for instance, hovering against an orange sunset, and I would remember something. This image would remembrance of why I was on this, what I was looking for, Shiva. It was then meaningful that when I eventually got initiated or received an initiation into an authentic old line in India, I was given the name Adinath Puri. And Adinath then, of course, means first Lord, who is Shiva. So I was actually given Shiva's name as my name as part of my initiation. So what can I say,
Yes, well, I'm glad out of the 300 million gods, you got the right one. Of all the gods you could have gotten, that was the great one. And it's very interesting, too, that scholars have said that Dionysus is not originally Greek. He was imported from the East. So I think, yeah, Shiva and Dionysus are two sides of the same coin, those gods of experience, of eradicating boundaries, of pure consciousness. And that's very interesting. And what other Indian gods spoke to you in your journey, Aki?
I mean, they eventually you start having a relationship, with all of them, or as you encounter them, you start understanding what kind of relationship you have. As a writer, you start having a relationship with Sarasvati, the river goddess of words and articulation. Of course, Ganesh, the elephant-headed son of Shiva, who's the destroyer of all obstacles and the blesser of new beginnings. Parvati, who's the wife, the Shakti, the counterpart to Shiva. Shiva without Shakti is nothing. So, of course, the wife of Shiva, the lady of the mountains, and even Hanuman, the monkey god, who for a long time I really couldn't really understand, but then experiences with kind of the martial arts of India made me understand the meaning of this monkey god and what he embodied. And so I became to have a relationship even with him. And I, as I said, I recommend that everybody who goes to India, approaches India and its mythic world, seriously, and makes the proper offerings and things, that suit the purpose of their journey there. Because those things seem to somehow work in India.
Yes, embrace the myth so you can get the right archetypes and archetypal energies and get your consciousness aligned with the strange world around you. And what about, I like one section when you talk about Kali, and of course you were talking about Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom. She also has her own sort of caricature of this evil goddess, but you write she's also, in a way, very benign. She's a destroyer of the illusions of our finite selves.
Yeah, I mean, Kali is, the mother. She's Kali Ma. She's the dark mother. She's the starry sky. She's, yeah. I mean, it's again, Indians have a holistic understanding of the world, which includes an understanding of the creative and destructive aspects of the cosmos or the manifested world. So they don't concentrate on only worshipping the light or the good, so to speak, aspects of the world, the created world, but they understand that the cosmos is an interplay between creation and destruction, which happen all the time. And so Kali is a very fitting image of this. She is also time. Kali is time, and the time is all devouring. Everything that is created in time and is ultimately consumed by time as well. As long as we exist as material beings, this seems to be the case. So, and I would say that sometimes I don't want to define these gods of India as mere archetypes or symbols or so, because I really don't know what they are. They are mysteries in a way. They seem to respond when you communicate with them. And I think that the Indian understanding of these gods is incredibly sophisticated and intricate, because they have this understanding that there is this indefinable or unapproachable wholeness or this absolute which is beyond comprehension, our human comprehension. We can't approach the absolute or the one, but we can only approach this one through its infinite manifestations. And these infinite manifestations are the gods and goddesses. So we as human beings can approach the unknowable immensity, so to speak, through the gods and goddesses. And to have a hermetic analogy here, there is also an analogy between Hermeticism, the Hermetic tradition of Europe, and India in the form of Dattatreya, who is this three-headed god, a messenger of gods, the bringer of the teachings, the bringer of wisdom, the singer of the lore, who is remarkably similar to Hermes Trismegistus in the European tradition, which I found to be a very interesting coincidence. Or not coincidence, but discovery.
Yes, I read about that, and it was really fascinating how you made the connection and all these, and of course all your work on gods. It reminds me of, and I speak about this a lot in the show, there's a saying in the Gospel of Thomas that says, "Truth did not come in the world naked. It came in images and types. The only way to get into the truth is you must go through the image." Would you say that is definitely a Hindu attitude?
Yes, completely. And a Hindu would call that a murti. And a murti is an image of the deity. So it can be in stone or even a picture, a photograph, or like an artwork. But image of a god. This is how you approach it.
Something very fascinating, and again, this might be very alien here in the West. And again, I was delightfully fascinated by this, is the idea of the Babas in India. Can you tell us a little bit about your experience with Babas and what they represent and what they do?
Yes, the Babas, or they're also called sadhus, are holy men in India who are dedicated to giving people blessings or sometimes curses. So they are people who have renounced the normal world, the everyday world, and they no longer belong to a caste system and to the everyday world of most people. But they have become residents of the extraordinary world, sort of permanent residents of the extraordinary world. So what their job, so to speak, is to wander around and seek God and the gods and goddesses and manifest them. And they're dedicated to them, often via some sort of very lavish spiritual practice, which is meant to gather sort of a spiritual force or something, magical power, which is called tapasya. So they will, make very extreme, sometimes vows of, for instance, standing for many years or keeping an arm up in the air for many years or not speaking for many years. They will make these kinds of things to sort of rise above the normal level of a human being. And so they have renounced the normal world, so they often wear ochre or black or different colors, depending on which sort of lineage or order they belong to. And sometimes they're naked, clothed only in ashes, and they often resemble the gods that they sort of try to emulate. So Shaivit, Shiva will, like Shiva, they will have reaching sometimes to the ground. They will have, long beards. They will have ashen skin and have rudraksha beads, these kind of prayer beads around their neck, and they will carry trishuls, which is this trident that Shiva carries, and so forth. And these are sort of the maintainers of the tradition of the protectors and maintainers of Sanatana Dharma, the Hindu tradition, the magical tradition. So they're the singers of the eternal songs and the keepers of the lore. And they are expressing an oral tradition so that they get initiated into an oral tradition, and then they express that oral tradition and give it forth to their chelas, their pupils. And they consider themselves the maintainers of cosmic law or natural law in India. So they are consider themselves kind of like the pure ones who keep Hinduism alive in a way. And these people used to also, back in the day, be literally also soldiers. They were like mystic monk soldiers. So these are not people that you want to necessarily, mess with. Like they would, they would have wars with the invading Muslims, for instance. And this has been a huge part of their history. So they carry weapons, and so they're very different from the image that we have in the West of this, kind of Beatles guru, kind of gentle, Although they both belong in that same tradition. It's just the sadhus tend to be kind of wild, and like Shiva, they hang out with spirits and ghosts and things like this. So they're a wild bunch of people. And being a sadhu doesn't necessarily make you a moral or an ethical human being or something. I mean, there's many sadhus that have very questionable personalities, although they might belong to a tradition that is very authentic and pure. They might have personalities that are very dubious and questionable. So I would advise people to proceed with caution.
Yeah, this is really fascinating. And again, I think we're looking at some sort of shamanistic, collective unconscious vibe, because I remember my father went to work in Nigeria, and he talked about being stuck in rush hour traffic, and walking through the traffic was a 7-foot tall Muslim priest. And he was naked, he had the long beard, and he was completely covered in ashes, and he was just chanting in an ecstasy. And people were just rolling down their windows, and what did they want? They wanted their blessings. This was part of the Nigerian society. So we see this connection with India and all around the world. Again, this sort of shamanistic vibe. And but what I wanted to ask you is, how do these Babas come around? And I guess I'm thinking of you might say, programming here in the West. I'm used to a centralized body like the Vatican, and that one decides who's a priest, who's a cardinal. Same with the Mormon Church, a lot of the First Baptist Church, and so forth. How is this centralized, or how do you become a Baba?
Well, you don't simply, I guess, become a Baba. I mean,
get a degree.
Yeah, I mean, there is an initiation usually into a lineage that you naturally belong to, which is determined by, your caste and your personality, I guess, and different things that determine which lineage or which order you would sort of naturally fit into. And then they have to try to find a guru that will accept them as chelas, meaning pupils or students. And then it is only through this guru that I think you can really become a Baba. You have to have in India they place extreme importance on a personal teacher, a guru, a protector. And so this guru is what grants you access to this tradition in a real sense. So even if you would be a lone practitioner somewhere, in the Himalayas, in a cave, you would still have a guru somewhere in the world, or several gurus probably. So this is how it's done. And there are many of these orders, dedicated to different gods, and they have a little different approaches to things. Like there are basically two major ones, which is the Vaishnava and the Shaivite. And Vaishnava are dedicated to the god Vishnu, the maintainer. And Shaivites, of course, then are dedicated to Shiva. And then there are sadhus dedicated to the goddess in her, female aspects, like Shakti devotees and so forth. So, and there's, hundreds of these different lineages and things, but they are of supreme importance because those lineages are what grants the sadhu the authenticity, which they consider very important, that they have a truthful lineage and belong to like a family of Babas in a way. They're a link in a chain. So that's how those things work. And of course, these families and lineages are then multiplied during these big religious festivals in India, where these sadhus then gather and make new disciples and give initiations, and then they go off on their own again for some years, and then they meet up again. And so these festivals are where a lot of this initiation and becoming Babas, becoming sadhus, takes place.
Well, that definitely makes sense, and it really is fascinating when you talk about the different groups, the Naga, the Agori, the Nath, and some are embrace sort of like the Gnostic, ritualistic sex magic. Some are ascetics and so forth. Some, as you say, are walking around naked or grabbing stuff and lifting stuff with their penises. All these very interesting acts. And you mentioned the Baba who had his hand raised, and I couldn't believe it, but you said he had his hand raised for Shiva for 30 years.
Yeah, he said it's actually 40 years, I think, more than 40 years at this point. And he said, it's a flag for Shiva, and once raised, it doesn't come down. So his hand was basically a shriveled stick of bone and nails,
I bet.
And he's very famous, that man in India, because of course, these kind of Babas, they get more rare all the time. And as India becomes more secular, it becomes harder for the Babas because their social acceptance, which still exists in India, it gets less and less every day. So back in the day, for instance, Babas could travel for free on trains, and they would be allowed to kind of travel for free on trains because they didn't have any money, because they were not supposed to have any money. But nowadays, they get into problems and thrown off trains and stuff because India is being secularized. It's losing appreciation for its own world. I mean, that is, of course, happening very slowly, but it is still a trend of the times. And these more extreme Babas are, disappearing and becoming more rare, like this one hand in the air. He's called Urdhva Bahu, one arm Baba. So, but this, again, these are very intentional and traditional ways by which they try to gather, Shakti, like magical energy. It is called tapasya. It's a spiritual practice, which is very, of course, it is crazy to look at. And like guys dangling, concrete blocks with their cocks. It's pretty like, but it is still part of this tradition that they do. And so all these tricks that they do and these extreme things, they serve a purpose, although they might seem very baffling to us Westerners. They do have a purpose. And what you mentioned about shamanism, yes, I mean, this is shamanism, I would say.
Yes, I would agree. And it's fascinating. And it seems some might be embracing the modern world, or at least the hucksters, as you write. You write about one dude who is supposed to be some spiritual leader. He has his own TV show. He's an action star in his own movies. He has 10 million followers. And he somehow made 400 of his followers castrate themselves like they were in the cult of Cybele or something like that.
Yeah. That's India. And that's also that's also the Kali Yuga. That's also the age of strife and degeneracy, which kind of the sacred texts of India talk about. The age of degeneration, when everything is polluted and the teachings become confused and people start selling the teachings, and the world is full of false teachers and false teachings. So nothing new under the sun. This is just part of the cyclical world of India, that this is the way it goes.
Again, it's truly amazing what you saw in this very different culture. Something that was also very impressive too, Aki, was the festival that is the largest spiritual gathering in the world. And you write how even Mark Twain knew about it. It's the Kumbh Mela. And you might think, well, Burning Man is big, or Rome and Easter is big, or going to the Kaaba for Ramadan is big, but this is much, much bigger, isn't it?
Yes, this is, when I was there that year, they had something over 60 million people coming.
Wow.
And it is the biggest gathering of human beings for a spiritual, religious, or magical purpose on planet Earth. And it's this festival that dates back to very ancient origins, of course, mythical origins. This has to do with the flowing of this heavenly nectar from a jar in the heavens, while gods are pursuing demons and so forth, or demons are pursuing gods. And drops of this Amrit, nectar of immortality, drops into 4 places in India. And according to the Indian astrology, this happens, between, was it 4 years or something like this, that these drops are again kind of dropped into, in moments the rivers become full of this, from this one drop of this nectar of immortality. And that's why everybody comes to this festival to bathe in the Ganga river. And so this is the main reason for this, is to come there and experience this bathing in this mythical river that is considered, to be filled with a nectar of immortality. And so this is also what I mentioned earlier as the place where the sadhus multiply and, where they make new disciples. And you see these mass initiations happen during these Kumbh Melas. And it is a fair, a religious fair, of course, but it's also a fair in every other sense. There's tricksters and hucksters and snake handlers and everything under the sun, and it does seem very ancient and it is on a scale where it's hard to imagine if you haven't been there, where it's just people keep arriving from every direction all the time, and driving a car is sort of impossible, and moving into any other direction than the crowd does is also impossible. And of course, everywhere there are these sadhus, which you rarely see in India normally otherwise, but suddenly the sadhus are everywhere, So, that's the Kumbh Mela, the most sacred and holy of the Indian festivals.
So to end, tell the audience where they can find more about your work.
I have a website, which is cederberg.com, and I have a public Facebook page, Aki Cederberg, an author page, which people can go and like, and they will receive updates from me. And that's the central thing. And right now I'm writing working on my next big book, which is tentatively titled Holy Europe. And it's in the same vein as Journeys in the Kali Yuga. So it's kind of written as a travelogue. And this time it's not exploring the East, but the West. So it's Europe and its sacred landscapes, sites, and traditions. And not, of course, all of them, but I have selected sort of 9 different worlds that I explore in the book through text and descriptions of my experiences of those places, and through photographs, which my wife has taken. So we have been writing or sort of working on this book for many years now, and I could really probably keep writing this book for the rest of my life, but to get something out there, I do have a deadline, and I try to finish it soon. So hopefully after that it will come out it will come out first in Finnish and then in English, and it will be a big sort of coffee table book, and I hope to inspire people to search for these eternal truths in their own spiritual landscape, whatever that might be.
We look forward to that book, and certainly look forward to your continued work as a poet, pointing to the gods and pointing to the holy. I think you're doing a great job, and the audience will certainly appreciate all the work you've done. But I think that's all the time we have today, Aki. I'd like to thank you very much for coming on Aeon Byte and discussing your excellent book, Journeys in the Kali Yuga, a pilgrimage from esoteric India to pagan Europe.
Thank you, sir. It was a pleasure.
And there you have it. Oh, you true seeker warriors. The first part of our interview with Aki Cederberg on his kick-arse book, Journeys in the Kali Yuga, a pilgrimage from esoteric India to pagan Europe. In our second part, we hit a lot of cool subjects, like wondering if both the Kali Yuga and Ragnarok are coming or are already here, how to spot false gurus in India and beyond, the meaning of yoga and its connection to magic, the ideas of Hindu sacred sex, and does it really exist in an authentic form in India, the connections and similarities between Finnish and Hindu gods. Aki also relates how he embraces ancestral traditions, and how you can too, as well as some of the Finnish mythos. Lastly, he grants his views on the demiurge and Gnosticism, as well as the state of mind of his home, that is Finland. Don't let memes and clickbait fool you into thinking Scandinavia is some sort of a utopia. Like the rest of the world, it's populated by humans doing what humans do. And is just part of the highest plane of hell along with the rest of the world, as Origen, the Gnostics, and some Kabbalists argued. Same as it ever was, but where hope dies, imagination must live. So I hope Aki and I have provided you with some fuel to bind your Icarus wings with the substance of dreams instead of the dead wax of materiality. And then you can go all the way to the suns of your potential. So please become a member to listen to this complete episode and all other ones. I won't go into details and all the other bonuses, but simply go to the godabovegod.com and scroll halfway down for all the options to keep this red pill cafeteria open. Which came first, the chicken or the egg? Well, it was actually the rooster-headed logos that is Abraxas, and it's there for your taking. Thanks for being here. Thanks for keeping me company. Thanks for traveling with me in the desert of the real and finding an oasis as the Kali Yuga and Ragnarok come bowling down upon us.
Candles at both ends. I cannot pretend that I'm innocent. Got a lot of trouble that we done started. The lucky ones are dearly departed, cause they ain't gotta deal with this, while the rest of us bear witness to this fucked up global sickness. We got too big for our britches. Convinced we gotta hustle and struggle for a little paper, forced to reduce ourselves down to the concept of cheap labor. Now I know I ain't a prophet and I know I ain't a sage. It's all been said before, but the only way to stop it is to look it in the face and say you can't take it no more. Realistically though, that ain't gon' happen. That shit just ain't gon' happen, cause you gotta get that dope. Yeah, you know you steady trapping, clapping after the show, cause your boy's adept at rapping. Get to your house and some food, smoke a Jolie in bed, and then you napping. Then you start dreaming about a work, but you ain't gotta be working so hard, but it's always the same kind of pain of being a player in somebody's game, where you ain't got no cheat codes, all the weapons locked. They be like, he don't know what we know, the information's blocked from him. Now you be jumping around like a frog while you trying to avoid these obstacles, and you be thinking to yourself, man, I need a break, but you know that's impossible. Screaming, I'm on the find those way out, but I can't see a thing, even though my eyes are open and I can't bear to blink.
Some of y'all say that I'm feeling too much, probably because the way I feel is fucked up. I'm watching this world disintegrate in front of my face, and it's the quickest way for me to lose faith. For what it's worth, I know that we ain't done yet, but I don't know how much darker it's gonna get. So I just spark another blunt, and after that another one, cause I know it's pointless just a friend.
Eater persimmons, resolving dilemmas, the innocent sinners. Innocence is gone, give us the sinners, pretend not to kill us, get down with the singers. I'm down to get ignorant, I'm down to get livid, be down to relive it. Go down to Vice City, see my boy Tommy, come find me. Cleaning up the wumper crew, gotta scratch that itch. Fuck is wrong with that bandicoot, running like a bitch. Cause we ain't got no Chico score, Shaq ain't shoot no free throw, throw that NCAA and 2K got me acting anti-social.
Trash bag, stole our divinity like we sailing with the black flag. How much bloody, your chemist water get? You cast a net and catch every single fool you ever met. Nobody rides bound by the dirt we live in. It's a gift and it's a curse. Ever since we plucked that knowledge from the tree, we've wielded it like children, no responsibility. Now we've abandoned our mother when she needs us the most, wandering the land, consuming like a bunch of hungry ghosts, destined to be reborn as lesser and lesser beings. And I'ma preach this evangel even if you disagree. And yes, I feel it in my heart, that's what I'm supposed to do. Charged to drop the sacred knowledge like I was an op-collar. Yeah, yes. Go back, Lee Tepe. Go back, Lee Tepe. Go back, Lee Tepe. Go back, Lee Tepe. Go back, Lee Tepe.